Alright, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. This time we're going to be breaking down every single card in Cutlass. We're going to be looking at the mechanical design, we're going to be talking about the art a little bit, and we're going to be talking about the lore behind some of these characters. So lock in, there's 45 cards to get through, starting with Herazia, the goddess of the tides. She is one of the main characters and is an evolution. Kind of. So starting out, Heras, who is a bounty hunter, is kind of where the story opens. And Heras' ship, the Tide Skipper, is attacked by the Leviathan. And the Tide Skipper is destroyed and Heras is killed. However, in that fight, she manages to deliver a crucial wound to the Leviathan, which spills from the Leviathan into her the essence of the godhood, because the Leviathan is basically the guardian of the spirit of the goddess of the tides. The previous goddess retired, created the Leviathan to defend the realm in her stead, and then it also guarded the sparks. Anyone that defeated the Leviathan could potentially create a new goddess of the tides, and that's how Herazia came to be. Upon becoming a god, she was kind of like, well, this sucks, actually. This is just a burden. I now have this ridiculously huge responsibility to worry about, and then has to leave, including leaving her daughter Taela, who kind of becomes the main character that all the plot revolves around, who we'll meet in a little bit. And so we get to see Herazia here as her like big scary goddess form, and she shows up a few times in the plot, and we'll get to that later. But this is kind of like the apex of the character, represented as a sea monster. Sea monsters are kind of like your big haymaker, your one key card that you build the deck around, similar to like a commander in Magic the Gathering. And it's like the peak of that archetype. Like, it's trying to do something very specific that matches a high synergy within a deck. Now let's run through the card text. It says, draw a card, your opponent banishes the top 2 cards of their deck. Repeat this effect for every 3 uniquely named structures in your tableau. And then Cutlass rule: if you have 3 or more structures with unique names in your tableau, claim a treasure. So Cutlass rule basically is just 3 or more uniquely named structures, in the same way that the text above cites it in the same thing. So the Cutlass Banish deck or Cutlass Control deck is trying to get lots of structures into play, and then try and also have many with unique names to potentially have Herazia have a big payoff. Most things that have Cutlass rule are just looking to hit that third one, which basically means that for the first 2 turns of the game, you're not claiming treasures, you're not accelerating, you're not doing anything too crazy, you're kind of just setting up. And then on the 3rd turn, if you've played 3 different structures, all of your stuff kind of comes online. You can start ramping in extra structures, you can start doing a couple extra things like that. And so Herazia is kind of the backbone of that deck. Now, starting out, we're going to have all 4 of our sea monsters, so you can get an idea of what those archetypes are. And so next is the Leviathan. A lot of the times when you see Cutlass content, and like even my desktop wallpaper at the moment, is this Leviathan art. This is one of the kind of big pivotal moments in the story where Taela, you can see very small there on the bottom left of the card, confronts the Leviathan trying to get revenge for her mother's death. Not knowing that her mother isn't dead, she's just in fact been transformed into a god. Now, she has this cool, glowing purple sword, and she fights the Leviathan and does eventually win and becomes Taela Ascendant, who we'll see in a second. But this is like the climax of some of the conflict in the story, where the Leviathan does show up. And so the Leviathan is, according to myth, basically the big sea creature monster thing. But the Leviathan specifically here has the head of a snake, the claws of a crab, and the tail of a fish. So you can kind of see in the card more specifically, because I have to zoom stuff really in to fit it in the correct aspect ratio. But the ship is being held by the big crab claws, and the fish tail is the thing that's keeping it afloat above the water. So it is really, really a cool creature, and we do see a lot of it in action doing stuff in this game. So let's get into the text. It says, choose a discard cost and deal 1 damage to every card in each tableau with that discard cost. And then Feeding Frenzy, choose a card in your opponent's tableau with 4 or more damage on it and claim it as a treasure. So to win the game, you need 7 treasures, and normally you collect a treasure by removing the top card of your opponent's deck and then keeping that in your treasure chest. Except for the Leviathan, who eats cards directly out of your opponent's tableau, which is very, very strong. But getting 4 damage on it isn't so quick. And so basically, you're slowly dealing damage to stuff, which slows your opponent down, and then you can try and start eating things to score points. So Leviathan is more like a different interpretation of the control archetype instead of Herazire, which is like banishing cards out of your deck, removing resources from you being able to play them. The Leviathan looks at the stuff that you have played already and stops them from being able to work and do stuff, and then comes and eats them. So that, and they're kind of some of the more important things that the plot runs through, like foils and antagonists kind of a thing. Including, next, we were just talking about Tyler, the Ascendant Goddess. So basically, Tyler starts out as a human, daughter of Heras, who then goes and becomes a god. Tyler goes and fights the Leviathan and defeats the Leviathan and becomes a god, and then through that connection realizes instantly that Herazire exists, is alive, and then they have a reunion, and in that reunion, Thomas Daring, who we meet way later in this video, actually kills Herazire, and then Tyler kills him with revenge, and then they ultimately have to fight Arvish the Corruptor, the Thing, the main, I don't know, mastermind, evil guy, kind of behind everything. They kind of set a lot of these things in motion, who, again, we'll hear about a little bit more later. But for now, Tyler, the Ascendant Goddess. This is more of a combo archetype called Self-Banish. And the text reads, shuffle exactly 20 cards from your banish pile into your deck to take an extra turn after this one. Treacherous Times, banish the top 2 cards of your deck, claim a treasure. So basically, if you are able to get to 20 cards, and then you get to take an extra turn, and then you want to try and have your tableau in a space where you can banish enough cards out of your own deck so that you can make it back to 20 cards again to potentially take infinite turns and guarantee that you will win the game on the spot. That's kind of the combo. It doesn't really play out like that unless if you're playing against a control deck, because like against Pirates aggro, it's really unlikely that you'll be able to get to the 20 cards without having to like really slow things down efficiently or like kind of play around. Like you can't really race to it. You kind of have to keep tempo and keep in front. But I think she's a really interesting card. I think she's very cool, and I like having combo archetypes as well as, you know, aggro and control archetypes. As far as the sea monsters go, we have 4, 2 of which are different types of control, one of which is a pirate aggro, and then one of which is the self-banish combo, which is our Herazire, our Tyler. And then that is going to bring us next to Arvish, the puppeteer of Scarshank. And you can see behind me that he's the big skull sea monster thing. Arvish in the story can sort of like mind control people. You can kind of see in the art, there's like a pirate right front and center whose eyes are glowing purple, who has the tentacle of, you know, Arvish on him with that kind of corruption. And it doesn't really work on everything and everyone, but Arvish uses it to try and set up things in motion to try and weaken things. Because basically the universe is built like this. Earl, which is the name of the realm upon which this planet exists, where Cutlass is based, is the realm of Earth and where planets and stuff exist. Wella, where Arvish is from, is an entire universe that's filled with water. There's no planets, there's just lots of stuff kind of floating in there, and so big sea creatures are like a really common occurrence. And there's much, much bigger things than Arvish that exist in that space. And then there's a third one called Yala, which is a realm of fire. And we'll hear about that maybe later. But between Earl and Weller, there is sometimes voids that will open up, and then kind of like a portal, and stuff can fall out. And there's this big culture in Kellera around the rift sealers and then the seers that are able to use power from the void and see things that are coming and try and prevent stuff like Arvish from coming through. And the the responsibility of the Goddess of the Tides is to fight anything that does come through and hold the barrier closed. And because the previous goddess retired, there was a window in which there was a less sentient creature, the Leviathan, doing this job. And so Arvish, who was very clever, was able to sneak through. And then that kind of sets up the events of the story of the game. So let's run through the text on the card. It says, return all cards from your discard pile with Scarshank in its name to your tableau face up with damage on it equal to its discard cost. And then Eternal Greed, if you have 8 or more crewmates in your discard pile, claim a treasure. So Eternal Greed is the common keyword amongst all pirate cards that do stuff with Eternal Greed. There's a bunch of them. And it's basically you're trying to get 8 crewmates in the bin. It's a self-discard deck, kind of like Dredge. And the goal is to fill up your discard pile so that you can get those extra effects turned on with Eternal Greed. Now, that first line of text, all cards named Scarshank, there's 2 different ones. We are going to see them later, but they are the core engine of the pirate aggro deck. And Arvish basically represents a way for you to recklessly throw them away because Arvish will bring them all back. And also it has a parallel in the story where Drake, or later Scarshank Dreadbeard, who we'll talk about later, is manipulated by Arvish to begin his journey, which eventually kind of ends up undermining Herazaya in a way. We'll get to that. We will get to that, but that is our last sea monster. That's sea monster number 4, which means we are now going to go through the rest of the Void faction cards. So everything with a black border is a Void faction card. They cannot receive orders from anything. All of the Void faction cards are either sea monsters, which do not receive orders, or events, which is what we are starting on now. And so that they are unique in that they can go in every deck, but they cannot form a deck core themselves, basically. Okay, so let's talk about Unexplored Maelstrom. It has the keyword They Emerge, and then if 2 or more treasures total have been claimed to this game, add a card to your tableau face down from your discard pile with development time equal to its discard cost plus 2. This does kind of 2 important things. The first thing is it adds cards to your tableau. The bigger your tableau, kind of the more powerful you become, the more actions and stuff that you have access to in a turn. But additionally, it plays it face down so that in your construction step, if you turn it face up, it will activate and send orders to all of your stuff, as well as in your main phase when you activate something, it sends orders and activates all of your stuff. So using something like Unexpected Maelstrom can basically give you a whole extra activation of your tableau, which is really important. And then sea monsters represent a 3rd activation of your tableau because they have access to the rampage step, which again, they send orders to everything in your tableau, but they do not receive orders from anything. So it's kind of like, this one in particular is specifically able to go in every single deck, but because it has They Emerge, it can only be done kind of in the midpoint of the game, which is around that turn 3 mark where everything starts coming alive, everything starts turning on, which is, kind of the idea. You have a couple turns to set up, and then everything starts firing, people start claiming treasures, stuff, interaction starts happening, which works really well, and that's kind of what I'm happy with it. But Unexplored Maelstrom represents one of 3 cards that do this effect. The other 2 cards have the faction-specific keyword, which again we'll see later, but this is a more generic one that allows either deck or any deck really to be able to play this card if they need access to that function. Next is another card that can go in every deck. This is Void Sign at Midnight. Now, as we were mentioning earlier, Void Sign is basically rifts that open up between those 2 realms, and kind of, we haven't really talked about the role of pirates in this universe. Basically, there is the kingdom, but it doesn't really have its own navy. Everyone is kind of a mercenary out for glory for themselves, and responding to the Void Sign and fighting whatever comes out is kind of part of the job. And often they are like drakes and dragons and stuff like that. Dragons are really, really common in this realm, but they're not super big. They're a lot smaller. And there's a lot of other, funky sea creatures and stuff to fight. And so that's kind of the main role. It's like a like Monster Hunter meets Fisherman, where you go and you kill the scary thing and then you bring it back and then everyone gets to eat it. It kind of like represents the ecosystem of a lot of how the commerce and stuff works. And there's also like escorting trade ships and all that kind of stuff. So being a pirate is actually a lot less, hello, I am lawless and I'm doing goofy stuff, and a little bit more like a noble lone warrior like a samurai. However, because of the reign of the king in the current time, which this time is set, he's gone a bit crazy, things have gone a bit awry, and so the pirates are becoming a little bit more like martial law, and are a little bit more reckless and going against the king and like following their own orders and stuff like that. And this is represented by the conflict with Drake and Tuboltimus, which we will get to later. There's going to be a lot of these we'll get to later. But let's talk about the text on this card. It says, put a sea monster card from your discard pile or banish pile face down into your tableau with 6 development time on it. That means if your sea monster is anywhere other than your hand or your deck, you are able to get that card into play face down so that you can activate it later, which is a really, really good card and is probably a one of in nearly every deck, because even if you've played your sea monster and it gets banished by an effect, say Thomas Daring, you are able to use the Void Sign at midnight to bring it back and potentially have it later, which is very good. And the 6 development time is basically the 5 that they normally have plus 1, which is kind of standard for this kind of effect. But it's a lot more specific rather than Unexploded Maelstrom, which is a bit more generic. And also, the Void Sign is the thing that usually indicates that there is a sea monster, so it kind of works in the lore and the mechanics. Anyway, let's move on. Alright, next is the Leviathan Strike. So, this is a scene ripped from the graphic novel, where we kind of see the intro, which is the Leviathan's attack on the Tide Skipper, Harris's ship, and Harris's like kind of downfall at the beginning of the story. And you can actually see her in the card art at the bottom left, about to get squashed. Yeah, there's a couple of different Leviathan cards which fit into the Leviathan archetype of dealing damage to stuff, which is represented by the specific conflict with the Tide Skipper. So let's get into the text. They emerge if 2 or more treasures have been claimed this game, deal 2 damage to anything. Basically, dealing damage to stuff fits within the Leviathan archetype, and so it would make sense to have a bunch of Leviathan cards that work together within that archetype. And so this one is pretty straightforward in that same way. Let's move on. Again, Savage Tides. So this is similar. This is basically, again, the Tide Skipper, but you can see a better angle of the Leviathan, where you can see kind of its underbelly a little bit as it's leaning up and over forwards, and you can see the crab claws are holding onto kind of the hull, and it's like pulling it apart and stuff. Which is how the Leviathan is such a big threat, because it is able to grip onto stuff and then bite it with its neck, which can be devastating to most ships, actually, come to think of it. Now, the text on the card reads, deal 1 damage to every card with a discard cost of 1 in each tableau. So yours and your opponent's. And specifically a discard cost of 1. So nothing with a discard cost of 1 can claim treasures and be winning you points. Most of them are kind of like card advantage cards. But if you have Void's Apex, which is if you have a sea monster in your tableau, you may choose the discard cost instead. So basically, at the beginning of the game, if your opponent's playing a bunch of stuff to help them set up and draw cards and stuff like that, Savage Tides can hit all of those cards and potentially slow your opponent down. Especially if you're playing a Leviathan control deck that does not have a lot of things that cost 1, Savage Tides is pretty good. But then once you have the Leviathan in play, and the Leviathan which can deal 1 damage to everything with a specific discard cost, then Savage Tides now can do the same. So you can start ramping up the damage on stuff that maybe costs 3, a little bit more of an important target in that same way. So I really like how these work together. It fits thematically, it works well with what the Leviathan's trying to do as a strategy. That is Savage Tides. And that is the last Void card. All of the cards are organized by color, and I've loaded them based on the index number. This card, Dragonskin Galleon, for example, is index number 9. It's not written on the card anyway, it's just for my personal collection. But basically, the first 8 cards are all Void cards, and then we have all of the Pirate cards, and then we have all of the Clearing cards at the end. So it's just how it's ordered, I guess. But let's talk about the Dragonskin Galleon. This is an interesting card because it is the ship of a character that hasn't shown up in the game yet. Basically, in the story, there is a pirate leader that's so well renowned and such a great warrior that their ship has been slowly replaced with dragon bones, and the sails have been replaced with dragon, like wyvern wings. You can really see it in there. It's all claws and bones and skin. And they're really fearsome, and no one really wants anything to do with them. And if Cutlass ever makes it to a season 2, we will see that character. But until now, we just have the art of the ship as it exists, because it's something that was supposed to show up in the first season, and it was like, no, it's actually better if this shows up later, and it's been deferred. But it's been 7 years and we haven't seen a season 2 yet, because season 1 is still sticking around doing stuff and hasn't really had a full release yet. So this is going to be kind of foreshadowing for the next season when we finally see its captain show up and start doing stuff. Now let's talk about the effect. On the card it says, draw a card, choose a crewmate in your tableau. It is additionally a structure until end of turn. Now this is really interesting in certain decks, specifically decks that are trying to play an even spread of both blue and red cards, because if you have a structure majority, the Dragonskin Galleon activating can turn one of your crewmates into a structure, both to help you hit clear and rule by having uniquely named structures, and also increase the uniquely named structure count for Herazaya, but it means that those crewmates can receive orders from the structure that you played after the Dragonskin Galleon. So it's like a really interesting utility piece here for that deck, and helps you potentially not just play red or play blue. Like, you can play in the middle, and there is cards to help facilitate that, like this one. Let's go next. This is Tibaltimus. We talked about her a little bit earlier. This is Tibaltimus the Scorned. So before the beginning of the events of the story, we have Tibaltimus and Drake. Drake, who becomes Scarshank Dreadbeard later. Now, Tibaltimus is the captain of the Dread Omen Singer, and Drake, her husband, is the first mate. Tibaltimus hears about the Leviathan's attack on a Tide Skipper, and before there's a weird timing issue that I need to explain, which we don't know about yet because I haven't talked about what happens to Tyela after this. Basically, the Tide Skippers destroyed Tyela, who was on that ship with her mother Heras, watches Heras die. Tyela is shipwrecked and drifts ashore, which takes a few days, and in that time, Tibaltimus goes hunting for the Leviathan after hearing about the attack on the Tide Skipper. Drake, the first mate, and the crew go, let's not do that. I'm pretty sure that will get us killed. I'm willing to mutiny over this. Tibaltimus, who is cursed with a great ambition, obviously feels incredibly betrayed that her sensible husband does not want to go and fight the giant sea monster for infinite glory and power. And so they fight. They have this epic sword duel, and Drake cuts off Tibaltimus's arm, but Tibaltimus wins the fight. And so upon returning to Kalira, Tibaltimus puts Drake in prison, and then basically spreads rumor all around that he has become a mutinous pirate, and gives him the pirate name Scarshank Dreadbeard, which he thinks is very cringe, but he's just like, oh, well, that's who I am now, I guess, and deals with it. Because it's very much like the piratiest pirate name that you could have, in a way. And it's kind of funny. She's mocking him with this title, and he's just like, okay, that's me, I guess. And a lot of the conflict is based around what Tibaltimus has now done to Scarshank, and Scarshank trying to reclaim being a person after this. And we see at the beginning of the events of the game is Drake is in prison and is freed from prison by Arvidge manipulating a guard to allow him to go free. And then he tries to get his revenge on Tibaltimus and a few other things like that, which we'll maybe get to later. We'll get to later, which might be right now, because this is Scarshank Dreadbeard. We don't actually see a card which is Drake. We only ever see him after the betrayal, because the events of the game are at the attack of the Tide Skipper, and the mutiny on the Dread Omen Singer happens before this, basically. So we get to see Scarshank Dreadbeard. He is one of the key cards when it comes to the pirate deck, because of his effects, which I will read to you now. Eternal Greed, once per turn, if you have at least 8 crewmates in your discard pile, play a crewmate from your discard pile. with development time equal to its discard cost +1. So that card is going to come in face down. That card is going to, let's say it costs 1. It will come in with development time 2 on it. And then that will allow you to, like we said before with the Unexplored Maelstrom, turn that card face up, it activates and sends orders and gives you access to the construction step, activating a tableau in extra time. But also can just give you every turn 1 extra guy every single time. And so that's why he specifically has the once per turn. This is the only card that can only activate once per turn. Everything else is once per phase, so a maximum of 3 times per turn, whereas Skarshank is only ever once per turn. That's how powerful he is. And basically, he's manipulated throughout the events of the game. Arvidge sets him off on his quest for revenge, and knowing kind of the things that he has to overcome to do that, he's lost his crew, he has no ship. He goes and beseeches the goddess of the tides for a wish, and he meets Heraziah, and Heraziah is in the place where the old goddess would be found for such, religious people to go and beseech her. By accident, she's actually there looking for answers herself. She's busy on her own goddamn quest. Skarshank shows up and he goes, "Hey, I want you to do this for me. I want to ask of you a wish." And she's like, "I'm busy doing shit. I'm not interested. You're in my way. You're being annoying." And he persists. And she goes, "Fine, what do you want?" And he goes, "I want to be the scariest pirate of all time. I want to be the most unkillable, most fearsome, warrior pirate." And she does so, and she grants this wish by cursing him and his entire crew to become undead, to become zombies cursed with a hunger for flesh, and so that they will never die, they can never drown, but they, kind of become monsters, they become creatures in a way, and we see a lot more of that motif as we get through the pirates, including the ambitious deckhand. We'll see a lot of the kind of purple imagery and kind of more evilly looking pirates with some of these characters. But ambitious deckhand is possibly the backbone of the aggro pirate deck because it is the most consistent card at claiming treasures. Let me read the text for you. Raiding party. If you have at least 3 crewmates in your tableau, you may banish 2 cards from your discard pile. If you do, claim a treasure. Now, this is interesting because it doesn't have Eternal Greed, but it makes it harder to activate Eternal Greed because you're eating cards out of that discard pile. It doesn't quite, like that's the cost, right? It's more consistent because there's no chance of failure when it comes to getting a treasure, but it eats resources that you need for your other cards to activate. And so that's, makes it potentially very, very strong. And Raiding Party is interesting because, and we'll see in a little bit, there is cards that allow us to get kind of around that problem of needing to having played 3 guys. And so you kind of just like slamming pirates, you're trying to claim treasures, and you're trying to get the gang together. And when we meet the second Skarshank, you'll see why. So this is the Spring-Heeled Looter. So similarly, it has Raiding Party. If you have at least 3 crewmates in your tableau, reveal the top card of your opponent's deck. If it's not a crewmate, claim a treasure. Because remember, people ain't cargo, mate. Now, basically, this is a great card if you're in a control-heavy meta or you're in a not pirate aggro meta, because the odds of it claiming a treasure is much higher. And the cost of it claiming you a treasure is nothing, right? So it's all about the odds. It's much less about the cost, different to the Ambitious Deckhand. And that makes this a really interesting card because you're trying to make a prediction on what your opponent is playing, but you can just kind of play a low number count and it will still activate, it will still do good stuff if you are only playing it in the right matchups and you're just discarding it to pay for other cards in the mirror match, basically. And so this card is pretty good. Next, we have our third treasure claimer from the aggro pirate deck. This is the Feather-Fingered Safecracker, which also has Raiding Party. If you have at least 3 crewmates in your tableau, you may put 2 of your opponent's banished cards into their discard pile. If you do, claim a treasure. Now, the intention of this card is to be a pirate aggro card that can fight against the aggressive self-banished deck, where we saw with Tyler Ascendant, where you're trying to keep them away from that 20 card banish threshold to stop them from taking an extra turn. And there is other crewmates that you can play that banish your opponent's cards to synergize with this to, help make it be a more consistent card. But that's kind of the idea on how it is supposed to be working. Now, as you may have noticed, a lot of the cards when I put up the background are mirrored from the actual card art. That's because a lot of stuff we tried to do as right aligned to avoid the icon banner on the left. And so behind me is going to be a mirrored version of that card. But basically, we're just seeing a lot more of the generic regular pirates for a little while until we actually get back to some of the more main characters, some of the people that are doing stuff. For example, the Carrion Deluge. So, fun fact, this was named Magpie Storm for the longest time to make it a slightly more Australian vibe. But instead, we now have Carrion Deluge, which is a lot more MTG black sorcery that makes your opponent discard a card and or makes all their creatures get -X. But for Cutlass, it reads, your opponent reveals their hand and you banish a structure card from it. It used to be, if you have Eternal Greed, you claim that card as a treasure instead. But we quickly discovered that any event card that claimed you treasures was too powerful, and so we stopped doing that. I think this is just fine. This is a great tool for the pirate deck to have fighting against control, because if they fire off the Carrion Deluge early, they can potentially rip out hate cards or eat stuff like Seed of Power to slow that deck down, and so it actually works really well. Next is Skeletal Salvage. So this is an event as well, and it says search your deck for 2 crewmates and discard them. Considering you want to get 8 in your bin as fast as possible, or perhaps some specific crewmates in your discard as fast as possible, and that is really, really important. I'm now realizing that we didn't actually talk about the effect of Tuboltimus, which we will skip back to really quickly. One of the cards that you may want to Skeletal Salvage is Tuboltimus the Scorned, and reading the text on her card is, if you have 4 cards named Tuboltimus in your banished pile, in your beginning of construction phase, draw until you have 4 cards in your hand, then skip your draw step. But then if you play the card and it activates in your tableau, what it does is banish this card, draw 2 cards. So the goal is to get Tuboltimus banished, and then she'll be drawing you extra cards in your turn, which combos well with stuff like Skeletal Salvage to get it into a discard pile, and then Ambitious Deckhand can be banishing those cards from your discard pile, ones that you don't specifically want there, for greater advantage. Which seems to work out. And I apologize for skipping that earlier, but this is a very complicated and long video for me to have to do, so bear with me, there might be some mistakes. And I just got excited about the story, okay? There's a lot of cool story stuff that hasn't really been shown off before now in a way like this. So next is the Tide Skipper. This is the ship we were talking about earlier that was destroyed at the beginning of the game. And now its effect is kind of thematic and interesting, because to activate effects using the Tide Skipper, you have to throw a crewmate overboard, a thing that happened quite a lot when it was shipwrecked. So let's talk about the text here. Discard a crewmate from your hand or tableau and activate its effect from the discard pile. So basically, you have to get rid of a guy, either from your hand or from your tableau, but that guy gets to do one last thing from your discard pile. This can be particularly useful if you have crewmates in your tableau that have a ton of damage on them, because the Tide Skipper can discard them and they will activate from the discard pile, a place where you cannot have damage on someone. Essentially repairing it, but for just one activation, then it's kind of gone. But it also lets you discard crewmates from your hand to do stuff, which means you're getting a crewmate into the bin quicker for the aggro pirate deck. But also this card works really, really well for the mixed color structures deck, because it means that you don't have to play crewmates into your tableau for those crucial effects. You get to have a uniquely named structure instead to be discarding those crewmates and use those effects just the same as if they were in your tableau. So there's some really, really high synergy going on with some of the pirate structures. Okay, next is the Landlocked Crow's Nest. This one is a ramping event similar to Unexplored Maelstrom, but it is more specific to the Pirate Aggro deck because it has Eternal Greed. If you have at least 8 crewmates in your discard pile, search your deck for a crewmate and play it face down with development time equal to its discard cost +2. I'm just realizing now it has a typo on it, but never mind that. This is similar to Unexplored Maelstrom, but instead of they emerge as the keyword, it has Eternal Greed, so you could potentially play it before that 3rd turn if you are able to get those 8 crewmates in the discard pile. And it pretty much has the same effect, it just has a different gate for you to be able to get there. Alright, next is Dread Omen Singer. This is Tibaltimus's ship. Its effect is, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put any number into your hand, and discard the rest. This card takes 1 damage for each card put into your hand this way. So you can either look at the top 3 and bin them all, which is pretty good for an aggro pirate deck. You can look at the top 3 and put them all into your hand once, and then the card has 3 damage on it, and it's unlikely to activate for a little while, which is also pretty good for getting card advantage. This is like a really good representation of Tibaltimus's unchecked ambition, where she's going to be doing this really helpful thing, but the cost is great, and I think that fits really well with her character. And it's just kind of a good generate resources kind of a card for both decks, because red structures can be played in both Pirate Aggro and in a structures controlled deck, in the same way that blue crewmates can be played in a crewmate aggro deck and a blue control deck. Alright. Next is the Abandoned Mutineer. I think this card is really interesting because as an engine, it gets you started and gets you putting cards into your discard pile, setting up for Eternal Greed. But then once you have Eternal Greed, it starts to disrupt your opponent by making them discard cards from their hand. So the text reads, both players discard the top 2 cards of their deck if you have Eternal Greed. If you have at least 8 crewmates in your discard pile, your opponent discards a card from their hand as well. So, pretty good card to open with and start discarding cards, start setting up your discard pile. And then in the late game, once you're kind of already set up and doing stuff, the discarding 2 cards isn't as helpful, but it's stops you from potentially, with the Ambitious Deckhand, banishing all the stuff that you need out of your discard pile. But then also will slowly chip away at your opponent's hand and remove some of the resources that they have. Alright, next is the Galleon Radar. So this is another resource generating card. It says you may discard 2 cards. If you do, draw 3 cards. This is basically just getting +1 card in hand. But pirates care a lot about putting cards into the discard pile, and so you're trying to kind of discard 2 crewmates and then draw 3 cards, which helps you dig into your deck a little bit deeper, but also fill up your discard pile with more crewmates to hit that Eternal Greed. And also it costs 0 because it's going to be discarding you 2 cards if you're activating anyway. If it costs 2 and then you have to discard 2 cards, that's discarding 4 to draw 3, which is really bad comparatively. And also it costing 0 is going to come up relevant in a little bit, but let's move on to the next one. This is the Remnant of Scarshank. So basically, Scarshank, after becoming an unkillable zombie pirate, begins to deteriorate. His humanity begins to fade from him, and he becomes a lot more like a spectral skeleton ghost kind of thing towards the end. Because after Taela ascends to the godhood, Scarshank, who is just a regular zombie at this time, goes to her and goes, you, the goddess of the tides, did this to me. I want you to undo it. I want you to remove all of these horrible things that have happened to me. I want everything to go back where it was before. And she goes, nah, I ain't about it, fam. And then she throws him into a rift, into the void, basically. And then he spends a long time fighting sea monsters in Whaler, in the rift, before coming back completely worn to a husk, basically. And so, Remnants of Scarshank's effect is, you may spend a construction point to return this card from your discard pile to your tableau. You may discard this card from your tableau to draw a card. So when it receives orders, you get to discard it and then draw a card. In your construction step, you can spend a construction point to return this card to your tableau, which basically turns construction points into cards drawn. And you can discard cards to make construction points, which means that you can turn discarded cards into cards drawn based on how many remnants of Scarshank you have. And then if you play Arvish, you return all of your Scarshanks to play, which means you don't need to spend those construction points on that. You basically just get +4 cards in hand, which is really good. It's a really, really helpful thing to happen to an aggro pirate deck that is very likely to have no cards in hand. So that's Remnants of Scarshank. This is probably the key card, like the 4 of that goes into the pirate deck. And then next we have Sun Crazed Cannoneer. This is one of my favorite art pieces of the pirates, where he's passed out drunk, but he's snuggling with the cannon, which I think is very funny. And the card text reads, banish the top card of your deck to deal 1 damage to anything. There's a lot of stuff that deals damage to a specific target, like Skurd, who we'll meet in a minute. But the Sun Crazed Cannoneer deals damage to stuff, and the cost is banishing the top card of your deck. However, if you have a payoff for something like that, like Slacker in a minute, who we will see, or Taylor, who wants to see 20 cards get banished, then this card suddenly becomes very good. Slows down your opponent and builds your exile engine. Okay, next is Skurd the Unkillable. So Skurd is basically Drake's best friend, right-hand man. If Drake was the captain, Skurd would be the first mate. After the betrayal and the Dread Omen Singer, and they all become zombies, except Tiboltimus, mind you, then Drake puts together a crew which includes Skurd. Skurd becomes the first mate, and then here we meet Skurd the Unkillable, whose effect reads, you can play Skurd from your discard pile as if he was in your hand, and then deal 1 damage to any non-pirate, because Skurd is very specifically not a traitor. Skurd will only deal damage to blue or void cards. And because it can be played from a discard pile, it's really good. It's really easy to be able to activate your tableau. Guarantee that even if you drew a junk hand, you still have access to this card, which is pretty good. And we all know the pirate deck loves putting cards in the discard pile, so it does kind of work out. Okay, next is the Gnarly Freediver, and this is why we have a bunch of crewmates that cost 0, because the Gnarly Freediver's effect is return up to 2 crewmates that cost 0 from your discard pile to your hand, which is great engine. You just get to go, okay, here's 4 Remnants of Scarshank in my discard pile. Freediver activates, we're going to put 2 of them back in my hand. In my construction step, I get to discard cards to make construction points. I'm going to discard those 2 remnants. That makes 2 construction points, which I can pay to activate the remnants and return them to my tableau, meaning that the 1 construction point that I got for free is not spent turning into a card. I basically get +1 for each time this activates, basically drawing extra cards. And then same with the Galleon Raider. You can put Galleon Raiders into your hand as well in that same way. This is part of the engine if you're trying to go for a draw bigger kind of pirate deck, instead of like a more aggressive, just trying to hit my tempo, constantly claim treasures kind of deck. And next is the Slacker, who we were just talking about. Now the Slacker is possibly, you start with Ambitious Deckhand, and he claims treasures, and he banishes stuff. And then you finish with the Cannoneer Slacker, because you can play this card from your banish pile as if it was in your hand. Eternal Greed, if you have 8 or more crewmates in your discard pile, claim a treasure. Which means that if he is banished with the Ambitious Deckhand, or he gets that hit with Sun Crazed Cannoneer or something like that, he's in the banish pile, you can play it as if it was in your hand. In your draw step, if you have no cards in hand, you draw 3 cards, which is the exact amount to discard to make a Cannoneer Slacker from your banish pile. But if you have an Ambitious Deckhand in your hand, you can't play that, because you have to play that card and you have 2 others to discard. So this is a way to get around being stuck unable to play stuff from your hand by getting it banished and then being able to play it from that pile instead. Okay, now we're going to start looking at the Kaliran cards. So you might recognize that a lot of these are the art from Castles of Kalira cards, because Castles of Kalira was kind of the first game that I published. It was something that I created because I thought Cutlass would never happen, basically. Cutlass was too big, it was too expensive, I didn't think it was ever going to get off the ground, and so we put a lot of the art to the side. For example, Leviathan, Hereziah, Taylor, a few other things were done, and we put it all to the side and we focused on doing the structures instead. And we made Castles of Caldera, and it went pretty well. And the goal was that it was a prequel to the Cutlass universe, basically. It's set a couple of 100 years before the events of Cutlass, and it's the settling and the building of the actual castle upon which the events gravitate to now in the Common Era. So this first one is Scry the Stars. This is an event. It is similar to Landlocked Crow's Nest or Unexplored Maelstrom. It reads, Caliran rule, if you have 3 or more uniquely named structures in your tableau, search your deck for a structure and add it to your tableau face down with development time equal to its discard cost +2. So Crow's Nest can only get a crewmate, Scry the Stars only gets a structure, Unexplored Maelstrom gets anything, and they all have a specific keyword that gates when you're able to play this card. And this one works really well with the ramp deck and was a combo later, which we will see with Cedar Power, which works really well. It's kind of like the main engine of the ramp deck when it comes to getting lots of structures into play and setting up for that big Herazaya turn. Alright, next is Fel's Seer Maiden. So we haven't talked about Fel, and we haven't talked about the Seers or the Rift Sealers yet. Fel is a character that doesn't have a card yet. She is intended to be in the second season as well, but she's like the main seer. She's also like one of the oldest people in Caldera, and basically she ends up being kind of like a guide to Thomas Daring, who Thomas Daring and Tyler are the ones that like go off in their little quest to try and fight the Leviathan. Fel is the one that knows all of the things about the Void and explains to them the different realms and how all like the sea monsters where they come from and like why the Leviathan is doing what it's doing and stuff like that. And the Seer Maidens basically, and you can kind of see in the art here where her eyes are like seeing off into the cosmos, you can see that they are sensitive humans that are kind of aware of the Void sign and where it will be and stuff like that. And then they are able to go to where that place is and use kind of magic powers to close those rifts. And that's kind of their job. Like, you're a wizard, but like your job is just a burden and it's really not that fun and it's kind of shit actually. That is what being a Seer Maiden is like. And this one in particular is pretty good. So the text reads, draw a card, your opponent banishes the top card of their deck. So if you're playing a deck where the goal is to banish your opponent's entire deck, this is a pretty good start. Gives you gas, gives your opponents less cards to interact with. Next is Caliran Forge. So this is another one that works really well with the ramp style control deck because it's part of a combo. We'll see the rest of that combo in a minute. But its text reads, you may put a structure from your discard pile on top of your deck. If you don't, remove up to 2 development time from face down cards in your tableau. So the ramp deck will often have a lot of face down cards in their tableau with a bunch of development time on, and the Caliran Forge can, like you play it for 1 face up by discarding 1 card, and then you get to remove 2 development time. It's like technically +1, and then every time it activates after that, it's +2, which is pretty good. So you can get a lot of development time off your cards, and it can help you turn a sea monster up faster. And then the first part of it actually is putting a structure on top of your deck works really well with Wizard's Colonnade, which we'll see in a second, which checks the top card, and if it's a structure, it adds it to your tableau face down with development time, which is another thing that the Forge can handle. So those 2 cards together work really well as part of a combo to help you set up and start ramping out your deck. But for the minute, let's talk about C-word Trebuchet. So in Castles of Caldera, all of the trebuchets were built to launch stones at another castle that was being built at the same time. So the story of Castles of Caldera is there's 2 castles. One of them, which is the one that becomes known as Caldera because that's the one that persists, and the other one becomes historically known as Kate. And Kate is destroyed because the trebuchet destroys the Princess Spire. That's kind of the story of what happens. And because the Princess Spire is destroyed, a rift opens up and a big monster called Tybalt comes and ravages Kate. And the person that fights off Tybalt is Tybaltimus's father. and he bestows that title onto his daughter, and he's like, this is the legacy you have to live up to. That's where her ridiculous ambition comes from. She's like, I have this name that I have to live up to. And so instead of the trebuchets being pointed at the neighboring kingdom, which is now destroyed, they've all been turned to the ocean to try and repel, ships, enemy ships, but also big sea monsters. And we do get to see a little bit of that action in the story as well. But for the text of the card, it reads, deal 1 damage to 2 different cards in your opponent's tableau and 1 damage to the Seaward Trebuchet. So basically, it's always kind of +1 damage on your opponent's stuff, but you are going to be slowed down as well, and you have to go and pay that cost to be able to constantly add stuff to it. It's not like an insane card, but it's pretty good when it comes to slowly building up stuff and slowing down your opponent to be able to slam a big Leviathan and start eating stuff like that. Okay, next we have the Wizard's Colonnade. We were just talking about this one. Now, the Wizard's Colonnade is like where the Rift Sealers are kind of trained and like detected. I don't know. Think of it like the Jedi Council's place where they have the younglings. It's like this big tower, and they're all kind of trained in there, and you can see the big view of the city. It's a little bit like that. Except they're like testing to see if people have the sensitivity to become one of the Rift Sealers or one of the Sea Maidens and stuff like that. So the text reads, Kaliran rule, if you have 3 or more uniquely named structures in your tableau, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a structure, add it to your tableau face down with development time equal to its discard cost +1. And like we said before with the Forge, it can be putting a specific card on top to guarantee it's going to activate, or it can be ripping those development time off to make them turn face up. Interestingly, the Wizard's Colonnade and Wizard's Tower from Castles of Kalira have a similar effect, where they're both interacting with the top card of your deck, which I thought was kind of cool. There is a lot of parallels between Kalira then and Kalira now. Some things kind of are similar, but I also knew that if there was going to be players coming from Game 1 to Game 2, that you would want to have some stuff that works kind of the same. In Castles of Kalira, you're playing a card face down or face up. If it's face up, it activates right away. If it's face down, it waits until later, which is the same core basis of how Cutlass functions, except Cutlass says, well, how many counters on there is going to tell me when that thing turns up, instead of just if it is activated by something else. It's just adding a layer of complexity after already teaching you that same base skill. Okay, next, my thing is frozen. Here we go. Next we have Seaside Barracks. So the text reads, if this card is sent orders from a crewmate, deal 1 damage to anything. Reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a crewmate, put it into your hand. So this is the backbone of a deck archetype called Blue Crew, where you're playing pretty much all blue cards, and you're playing, there's a few different structures in the series where if it receives orders from a crewmate, and you'll probably figure it out that a red crewmate cannot send orders to a blue structure because they don't share any traits, but a blue crewmate can send orders to a blue structure. You load up the beginning of your tableau with these structures, and then you start playing crewmates to activate all the extra effects of those cards. Seaside Barracks being potentially core amongst those, because it will help you find more crewmates. Next is Tyler the Seeker, one of those blue crewmates. She has the effect, turn a card in your tableau face up, any development time becomes damage. So Tyler is the main character, basically. The story kind of follows her events throughout Kalira, from being shipwrecked at the beginning with the destruction of the Tideskipper. She goes to the king, she tries to appeal to the king for help. He's like, why would I do that? And Subaltimus is there. She's like, literally, I know the Leviathan exists. I want to go and fight this thing. I'm just going to go and fight it because I can. And then, it kind of kicks off the beginning of the events of the game. Now, let's talk about the card text. It says, turn a card in your tableau face up. Any development time becomes damage. So that card will turn face up. It will get an opportunity to activate, but then it will not receive orders. It will be busy repairing for a little while. This works really well with some cards when you're worried about not having opportunity to activate. You don't have enough, construction point income to be able to make some stuff turn face up. You have a sea monster face down with 6 damage counters on it because you used Void Sign at midnight. Stuff like that. Tyler is a pretty good card to solve that problem. And it also has a really nice combo with Seed of Power, which we'll get to later. But for now, we're going to talk about Outskirts Watchtower. This is a card that's been kind of buffed and nerfed and changed a bunch recently, but the text now at the most current version reads, if this card was sent orders from a crewmate and there are 3 or more factions present in your banished pile, choose an event in your banished pile and activate its effect. This is the only card that does not activate when it is turned face up, and it is only activated when it receives orders because it is that powerful. And additionally, it will only activate if you have 3 different colors of cards in your banished pile. Now, at the moment, there is only 3 colors of cards, but in further seasons, this will be a little bit easier to accomplish. And I'm kind of wary of that fact. And then being able to play and copy an existing card. So if you have a bunch of different events banished, you kind of choosing whichever you want is going to be perfect for this scenario, and you can be doing it every single turn. Whereas differently, events are normally like a one-time deal and then they go away for a long time. And so this card is very, very strong, and you're kind of trying to set up to be able to do that thing. Especially because of cards like Rift Sealers, which we'll see in a minute, has a really, really good combo with the Outskirts Watchtower. But we'll get to that soon. First, we have to talk about Seed of Power. Seed of Power is the only structure that can claim a treasure, but let's get into the text and then we can talk about some combos. So it says, the first time this card takes damage, draw cards equal to the number of damage counters put on it. Clear and rule, if you have 3 or more unique structures in your tableau, claim a treasure. So that first line of text is really interesting because it says that when Tyala turns me face up and 3 damage counters are put on me, draw 3 cards. If you use something like Scry the Stars we mentioned earlier to put Seed of Power into play face down with development time +2, that will have 5 damage counters on it when it's turned face up by Tyala, and you'll draw 5 cards. That's pretty strong, but then also you claim a treasure after all of that. Still pretty strong. And so this is kind of like the backbone of an aggressive structures deck, because you can play like a control type thing where you slow them down and then you start Seed of Powering, or it draws you the 5 cards that let you slam the sea monster down straight away instead of having to slowly tick it off. Or you then go and play like a banish win con where the goal is to remove all the cards from your opponent's deck, and then you don't actually need anything that says claim a treasure, because really all it says is remove 1 card from your opponent's deck when you could be playing something that says remove 2 cards from your opponent's deck. So next we have Thomas Daring, the Stolen Son. So Thomas Daring is basically the companion to Tyala. Like I said at the beginning of the story, she shows up, she goes to the king, and she says, hey, I want to go fight the Leviathan. It destroyed my ship. It's a great big monster that's coming and it's going to kill everyone. We should be worried about that. And the king's like, bah. And then Thomas Daring is like, bro, that's really serious. We should do something about this. And then he goes against the king's orders and then, meets up with Tyler, and they try and figure out what to do about it. And then they leave and go on this big quest together. And then at the end, Tyler, after becoming a goddess, kills him for his betrayal, because Arvish manipulates Thomas Daring to kill Hereziah. Tyler, very mad about this, turns him to ice and then shatters him, which is a befitting end. But basically, that's exactly how his text reads. It says, banish an opponent's sea monster, banish Thomas Daring, the Stolen Son, because he banishes Hereziah, and then as a cost, he is removed also. And it kind of fits all together within the lore and how he functions. And he is called the Stolen Son because he is not actually the current king's son. He is the son of a captured mermaid, and that becomes important to the story later on. But basically, he is treated as the son of the king, but the king kind of always knows that he's not actually his kid. Okay, moving on. We have the Spire of Exile. So this is the Princess Spire that you mentioned earlier from Kate, which has now become a place very, very far removed from the kingdom. But this is where Fel, the main seer, kind of resides and does all their funky magic stuff. The text reads, your opponent banishes 2 cards from their hand unless they banish a crewmate from their hand instead. This is a similar effect present in a lot of Magic cards, where it's like discard 2 cards from your hand or discard 1 specific thing. And I think it works really well here because against a structures deck that doesn't have any crewmates in it, is going to be punished extra hard having to get rid of 2 cards. Whereas a crewmate deck is like, well, I want to have crewmates be put in the discard pile and on the banish pile. I just kind of have to lose a crewmate, or I can banish 2 events or whatever. So I think it's a really interesting card because very often in this game people have no cards in hand, and then the people that are trying to keep cards in hand might be punished a lot by the Spire of Exile. Alright, let's move on. Next is Banquet Halls. So this is a shot of the top of the Castle of Kalira. This is basically a different angle of what the throne room looks like, but this is the Banquet Halls, which is adjacent. And its text reads, remove all damage from a card in your tableau. If 4 or more damage was removed in this way, draw a card. So this is another synergy with Seat of Power, where Seat of Power gets somewhere between 3 and 5 damage counters put on it, and then Banquet Halls can remove them all, and you get to draw a card. But basically, rather than trying to hit that threshold, because all of the self-damaging structures don't really get above 3, unless if they've been put there by Scry of the Stars. But the reason why the threshold is 4 to draw a card, it's because that's the threshold where the Leviathan will eat things. So if you narrowly avoid death, you are rewarded with extra resources. Next is Augmendar, the Reshaper. So Augmendar is kind of the king's, not like right-hand man, but like one of his really trusted advisors. He was a very well-known warrior, very strong warrior, and then kind of retired and became a blacksmith instead. Because of the death of his wife, which is the thing that kind of motivates a lot of the stuff that he does in the story, and why he wears the necklace that he does, which was a gift that he made for her, that he obviously started wearing as a way to remember her after her death. And he forges the Godslayer, basically, which is the weapon that Tyler uses to defeat the Leviathan. And kind of immediately after creating it, he goes, I've kind of destroyed everything. Just by this existing, I have regrets, and I've kind of done a big bad thing. And then he goes on this big quest of self-reflection. He travels to the Shrine of the Goddess and like talks to Hereziah, and it's like, what have I done? What does all this mean? And then Hereziah, both being able to see the future and know what happens, forgives him, because Thomas Deering with the Godslayer, manipulated by Arvish, is the way that Hereziah dies. But Hereziah is like, well, I can't stop this. I have to let it happen, because I know that this is the thing that makes Tyler kind of understand the role of the Goddess of the Tides, and that she's filled with the things that is going to allow her to defeat Arvish. So she has to have that kind of moment of sacrifice for her. And Augmendar kind of just ends up like, why have I done this? kind of a thing, and kind of does his best to go on this journey of redemption, which we'll see much more in the second season after the defeat of Arvish. But for right now, he's just kind of a vessel for some of the back of the story. Now, his card effect says, draw a card, add 1 development time to one of your opponent's face down cards. This second line of text has a specific combo with a structure, but if your opponent is just playing cards face down, Augmendar slowing the time it takes them to be turned face up is pretty good. And he also gets to draw a card, and he can send orders to those blue structures because he is a crewmate. Okay, next up we have the Kaliran Moat. This is like an aerial shot of the actual castle of Kalira, where you can see it's actually in a bay. So there's like a really big dock, there's like a huge moat around this castle, which is one of the key strategic things that made it successful in becoming the established castle, as opposed to Kate, which was further inland. Now, the text reads, shuffle a card from your discard pile into your deck, then draw a card. Kaliran rule. If there are 3 or more uniquely named structures in your tableau, you may choose a banished card instead. So this is a way for a control deck that's fighting a banished deck to potentially stem the bleeding when it comes to losing resources out of their deck. they can be each turn shuffling stuff back in to try and keep that tempo and avoid having all the cards in their deck banished. And then next we have merchant markets. So this is an event, and kind of like marketplace, you're trading out a card in your hand to try and find something else. Merchant markets will banish itself, for being an event, and then find a card in your deck and put it in your hand. The text reads, search your deck for a Void faction card and put it into your hand. But Void's apex, if you have a sea monster in your tableau, you may choose any faction card instead. The intended purpose is that merchant markets can help you go and find your sea monster in your deck, because Void's Sign at Midnight only gets it into play from banish or discard. If it's in your hand, you can just play it. Merchant markets can help you get it out of your deck and put it into your hand. And then if you have it in play already, it can just go and get you any card. And it can also just go and get stuff like Leviathan Strike, Savage Tides, or Unexplained Maelstrom, because they all work pretty well also. So it's just like a good consistency card. It's just like a nice one-off to have in some decks. And if you're playing like a really event-focused deck, like you're playing the Tyler combo deck, then you want to have many more of this bad boy. Okay, now we have Clifftop Prison. So this is the card we were talking about earlier that has the big synergy with Augmenter, because its text reads, turn an opponent's card face down, discard a card, and put development time onto that card equal to the discarded card's cost. So we turn a card face down. Let's say I discard something in my hand that costs 3. That card then has 3 development time on it. That's how long it's going to take for your opponent to turn it back face up. And then if this sends orders to an Augmenter after it, Augmenter goes, okay, that's now 4 counters and I'll draw a card. And so that's kind of the idea. It's a way for you to shut down your opponent's tableau without specifically moving stuff from it. You're just adding resources that they need to spend before those cards can activate again. Alright, next we have Stone Gate Before Oblivion. If you have played Castles of Calera, you might recognize that this is the box art. This is the battlements. Now, Stone Gate Before Oblivion is very different in its effect. It reads, you may deal 1 damage to any non-Caleran card. If this card was sent orders from a crewmate, deal 2 damage instead. So this is another Trebuchet similar effect, but the upside is that the Trebuchet can split damage. The Stone Gate cannot. It's always going to be doing 1, and then if you are playing a crewmate, then it's going to deal 2 instead. So it's asking for synergy to become more efficient. Next we have Rift Sealers. Rift Sealers is a thing that we've mentioned a lot. It's kind of the backbone of the magic system for the Cutlass universe, and their effect is very strong. What it says is search your deck for an event card and play it. This allows you to get around the timing restrictions for playing an event in your construction step, but it also adds a lot of consistency for being able to play event cards. You can play a much lower number of them because Rift Sealers can go and get it, and because it is a blue crewmate, it can be played in pretty much every deck just fine. And it just helps you have a lot of consistency. It can also send orders to all those blue structures. It's just all around a good card. You can play it in the Pirate aggro deck to go and find Skeletal Salvage, to put skeletons in the discard pile because we love skeletons in the discard pile, and then help set up all of that. And then our lucky last card, this is King's Edict. So this is a shot from the comic of the king. And this is one of the art pieces that if we ever do a manufactured print run, I'll probably replace. But this is the final page of the comic where basically Tyler has just finished explaining to the king everything that's going on, and the king is like, well, the life of a single pirate killer means little to me, even a famous one such as Harris. My fleet will not waste its time chasing shadows in the fog. And then you can actually see Augmenter is sitting next to him as kind of his advisor, and he's hearing the story about the Leviathan, and he is best friends with Fel. They talk a lot, and so he knows there's probably a realistic problem they have to deal with. And Fel comes to him later and says, hey, I need you to build this weapon so that I can give it to Thomas, because I don't want Thomas to die. I want him to be able to fight the Leviathan and win. And then Augmenter's like, okay, yeah, I get it. I think he overdoes it a little bit. But that's it. That was the 45th card. That is all of the cards in the game. And this is what its effect does. Choose any 2 cards in either discard pile and banish them. So this is basically the king being like, all right, Tyler, be gone from me. But also, her leaving means that Thomas Daring leaves as well. And so 2 people are banished from the kingdom, which is the king's edict. And so a lot of the cards have like really, really strong like lore tie-ins and mechanical synergy and stuff like that. And that's part of the stuff that I think makes Cutlass a very good game. And toot my own horn a little bit. But I enjoy it very much. I've been playing it for a long time now in playtesting and showcasing it for events and stuff like that. And now it's completely free to play. It's got a print and play up on itch.io. And also I have another different video on the channel, which I will link here, where you can go and find the downloadable files for it on there as well. So that's it. That's the entirety of Cutlass. A lot of the different lore, not all of it, but a lot of the different lore that explains what some of the characters are and what they're doing and why they're here, and what all the mechanical effects, and talking about some synergies and why the cards are designed the way that they are is because they all work together just like this. And if you want like a more cohesive exactly how to play the game, then go and check out that last video that I did that does actually go through and explain the entire game. This is much more a deep dive on all of these specific cards in the set so that you can get to grips with what's going on. And if you want to see more Cutlass content, I have a whole bunch of gameplay up on the channel. I have a whole bunch of gameplay coming out soon, so click that subscribe button as well so that you can see all the cool stuff as it comes out.